Hey buddies, it's Miss Puggy here, coming at you with another Borderlands 3 video. Today we're doing a clone-focused Zane build that's all about using the Grease Trap pistol to deal crazy amounts of damage. For some reason, the Grease Trap pistol has weird scaling with the clone, and it's able to deal, I've seen, around 500 million damage per shot if you have the right gear, and I'm really excited to show you that. But before we get into it, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. You have no idea how much it helps me out, and let's get into it. So first things first, let's talk about the Grease Trap. So the Grease Trap has two firing modes. It has I'll show you right here, it has a firing mode that shoots grease like that, and then a mode that shoots actual fire like that. So when you spray them with the grease, it coats them yellow, sort of like the It's Piss grenade, puts it like kind of like a debuff on them. And then when you hit them with the fire shooting part of the pistol, the enemy explodes and does tons and tons of damage to it. But with the clone, it scales really weird with it and is able to deal around 500 million damage per shot if you constantly spray the grease on them, and the clone pretty much does all the work. So this build's all about making the clone as badass as possible and just really being the assister of the clone. The clone in this build is the main character. You're just a side character in the background trying to support the clone as much as you can. But with the Grease Trap we have here, we have action skill and splash damage is increased by 125%. Now it was nerfed, which is unfortunate, but this anointment is still very good because of the way the splash damage anointment works in the damage formula. Not an additive multiplier, it's instead a multiplicative multiplier, which is really good in any damage formula for any game, but especially Borderlands. It just increases your damage by a crap ton. So on top of that, I do have another Grease Trap here with instead the anointment while digiclone is active, regenerate 30% of your magazine size, which is very useful because it does allow you to assist the clone for longer periods of time. I find myself using this particular gun with this anointment anytime there's large amounts of enemies that I just need to grease up. But if there's just one enemy, like a boss or something, I use the action skill and splash damage is increased. But on top of that, we are using, of course, a Revolter. Revolter is one of the top tier shields in the game, so it's in a lot of builds, and it's very easy to activate, especially with Zane, since Mantis Cannon you can keep spamming, so I won't talk too much about the Revolter. Next we have the It's Piss Grenade. We have action skill and bonus incendiary damage for 10 seconds, and the Piss does increase their damage by 20% when it hits an enemy, which is very nice. I've run into problems where enemies were fire immune, and action skill and bonus incendiary damage did not help me that much. Of course the Revolter did most of the work, but sometimes, like when I was doing the true Malawan takedown like I'm doing in the background, there was a problem whenever the fire guys came out. So I would probably recommend trying to get a different action skill end besides fire, just to have as a backup, but I did not have that on this Zane, but oh well. On top of that, I have a Seein Dead Class Mod. This has 3 points into Violence, and 2 points into Donnybrook, which just increases our damage overall, and the fire rate is very nice to have because we do regenerate our magazine pretty fast, but the fire rate does outweigh that, so you will run out of ammo if you're using the anointment that regenerates your ammo. But the main thing here is that basically all of our kill skills are more powerful, and every time we hit an enemy we have a chance on activating our kill skills, which is not the main seller. It's really the 10% increase on the kill skills, which is very good. On top of that, we have 3 secondary stats with splash damage, weapon magazine size, and action skill damage. Action skill damage, of course, to increase our clone damage. Weapon magazine size, which is very useful, I found, when fighting enemies because I want to grease them up as much as possible, so having as much magazine is very useful. And of course, splash damage, once again, just increases our damage by a lot. Then I have an Element to Projector Victory Rush. The Element to Projector Victory Rush, as you know, is a staple in a lot of builds for me because you can use the Sellout Pistol to aim at your feet and just activate dot on yourself to get Element to Projector. I did not actually have a sellout on this build. I kind of forgot to add a sellout, which is really funny. But besides that, the Elemental Projector Victory Rush did increase our damage by a lot. You would get some dots in yourself when fighting some enemies, so it would occasionally boost our damage. But the Victory Rush itself does increase our damage by 18% every time we kill a badass, which is very useful to have. At the clips you saw in the beginning of the video with me killing the bosses, I of course could have killed the bosses quicker if I had thought to use a sellout, which is really just dumb of me that I forgot to do. But if you are doing this build, don't be dumb like me and remember to equip a sellout. When fighting bosses, you would kill the bosses even quicker. Maybe even be able to deal a billion damage with this build or something, I don't know. Let's now talk about the secondary stats. We have pistol damage, area effect damage, and magazine size. All obvious reasons why we have those. All of them increase our damage, and magazine size allows us to shoot as long as possible, which allows us to increase our DPS overall because of that. And then I have a Burning Scourge on this build with a U-Rad anointment, just in case we ever get downed and for some reason the clone's not out or we can't kill an enemy with our Grease Trap. Burning Scourge is just a really good rocket launcher. It's able to kill a lot of enemies very easily, and we have a lot of splash damage stuff on this build to increase increase our damage overall with the Scourge as well in case you ever need to use it. And let me explain how this build works in case you haven't picked it up. Basically, you want to summon your clone. The clone is going to be using the primary fire because clones aren't able to use the alt fire, so it's your job to grease them up. So basically you want to equip your grease trap, make sure it's on the actual greasing part of the weapon, aka the alt fire, and just spray all the enemies, make sure they're all nice and lubed up. Yeah, boy. And then Zane's clone is going to shoot them once and they're just going to die instantly because of all the stuff. Of course, they have fire immunity or resist. They have a chance on not dying instantly. Or if they're a boss, you might need to spray them a couple times with the grease, because once Zane's clone hits the enemy once with the grease trap, the debuff does disappear, so you got to keep applying it to them. So if you have a boss that's in front of you, you want to constantly be shooting the grease at the enemy so the Zane clone can have as many procs with the actual grease trap explosion as much as possible. There isn't much else to the build. It's pretty brain dead, and as I like to say, all builds that are good are usually the brain dead ones, so it's very easy to just use. Sometimes the AI got caught up when in the Malawang takedown, not shooting the enemies I would want, or not even shooting Wonton when I would want, which is really, really unfortunate. But otherwise, it was able to kill the enemies in a Malawang takedown with ease as soon as it actually started shooting them, or not shooting at someone that's behind cover. But besides the impurities with the AI, this build does crazy amounts of damage. Now let's get into the skill tree. We have the red tree. We go all the way down to the capstone of the red tree, of course, because we can't get Zane's clone with our equipped gun without that capstone. So that capstone just increases our gun damage. That capstone just allows us to get Grease Trap on our Zane clone, which has a bunch of different funky scaling with a bunch of weapons, including the Grease Trap as we've seen before. Let's move down the tree. We got 5 points into Synchro, which just increases our gun damage when clone's out. We have 3 points into the magazine size skill point, which just increases our magazine size, which is very, very helpful on this build because you want to be spraying as much as possible. I do have 2 points in the bar time. I don't want any points in the bar time, but it was required to get down further in the skill tree, so those are kind of just throwaway. We have 5 points in the Donnybrook, just increases our gun damage by a crap ton. We got 1 point into Fractal Frags, so our Zane clone can throw its piss to put another debuff on the enemy to increase their total damage. We have Duct Tape Mod, which allows us to get immunity to gun damage on ourselves, but the action skill N kind of reverses that because action skill N is still able to hurt Zane even with the duct tape mod, so it doesn't actually help as much as I thought it was going to be. Of course, you could try to unequip action skill N and you could do a little bit better, but I don't find myself killing myself with this build often, so I guess in overall it doesn't matter too much. Got 1 point into pocket full grenades just to have a little bit of grenade regeneration in case we ever run out of grenades. We don't want to run out of grenades because we need grenades to activate this next skill, Boom Enhance. We need 3 grenades at all times to increase the amount of damage with the clone as much as possible. So this just allows us to get clone out there as beefy as possible. Basically an essential point if you're ever doing a clone build. We have 3 points in Trick of the Light, which increases our cryo damage if targets aren't targeting me, which is very nice. And we got 3 points in the Supersonic Man, which just allows us to increase our movement speed, which will increase our damage by a crap ton when we talk about a skill in the blue tree. And before we forget, I have 2 action skill augments I like to use. I have this one, which is a very hard to pronounce German word that basically just allows us to regen our shields. Most of the augments I feel in clone are pretty bad. So just that is an okay ability, so we just have that because the other ones aren't too useful in themselves. And then I have Doppelbanger just in case if the clone gets left behind. I don't like having to swap with it and then running all the way back where I was, so it's nice to just use it to detonate it in case we ever need to continue in the takedown, which happens a lot. I'll have the clone all the way back behind me and not doing anything, and I need to either switch with him and then run all the way back or just explode him and get him back, because our action skill cooldown is very quick, so we get our clone back really quick after blowing him up. Also, it does have the ability when the clone gets killed, or even if we detonate him, it does an explosion, which I've seen to deal like 8 million damage. It's not a lot of damage. I mean, like, it's a nice little damage increase in case clones get killed, I guess, but you know, it's mainly for when I was doing the Malawang takedown, him being left behind. Next, we have the purple tree. We got 5 points into mana focus to increase our accuracy and handling. To be honest, I was just putting 5 points in there because the rest are kind of useless for this build, just to allow us to get down further into the skill tree, because the important ones are Headsman's Hand, which increases our critical hit damage by 30%, and it stacks twice, so it increases our critical hit damage by 6%, which is a crap ton. And then we have 5 points into Commitment, which just increases our gun damage, and action skill cooldown rate, which is very nice. Once again, just more damage on our build. And then we have 3 points in the domino effect, which just increases our fire rate even more, which allows us to increase our DPS, of course. And then some points in the reload speed, just to allow Zane to reload quicker, as if he needed it, because he reloads insanely quick, especially because of the blue tree. We have Cool Hand. Cool Hand just increases our reload speed by a crap ton. It's very, very useful. But let's move on to the more interesting things. We have Violent Momentum. Violent Momentum, as any Zane main knows, is one of the best skills you can have as Zane. It increases your damage by a crap ton, especially with Mayhem scaling, and you are just able to abuse it with a lot of builds and a lot of synergies to increase your damage by insane amounts. And then of course we're using 5 points of the violent speed to increase our movement speed by a lot, so we can increase our violent momentum damage overall, as said before. And then we have 1 point of salvation. You never need more than 1 point into any life steal skill on any character, especially with Zane. This 1 point just gives us 3%, and since we're already dealing millions of damage, 3% is able to restore our health in a second, which is absolutely crazy. And then we have 1 point in Seein Red, which allows us to activate our kill skills on demand with the Mantis Cannon. We have 5 points in the Violence, which allows us to increase our fire rate by a crap ton. We have 1 point in the Playing Dirty, which allows us to have our first 5 shots to fire an additional projectile every time we activate our Mantis Cannon. For those who don't know, the extra shot chance doesn't actually mean that every time you shoot has a 50% chance on shooting an extra projectile. It really just means every time you kill an enemy, you have a 50% chance of activating the skill. But since we're using Mantis Cannon with Seein Red to proc all of our kill skills at once, this just allows us to double our DPS for the first 5 shots instantly. So that's very, very easy. Just 1 point in that increases your DPS by a lot. And then we have Good Misfortune, which just increases your active skill duration, which is nice to have in case you want your clone out there as much as possible, which is what we want. And then one last point in the Death Follows Close to increase our effectiveness of our kill skills, which is very, very useful with Zane on any build. So obvious point right there. And I forgot to say, I'm using Colder Shoulder with the Mantis Cannon to allow us to have freezing Mantis Cannon in case we ever need to do cryo damage. Most of the time I don't see it actually freezing, so it's mainly to slow down enemies or just to deal another different element to an enemy, because the Mantis Cannon does deal a couple million damage, which is very, very nice per shot. And then we have 1 point in No Way Out, which is just allows us to increase our damage even more. If we hit an enemy, it pulls it right to us and allows it to take more damage, which I've seen to increase our damage by a lot, because 25% means a lot when you're dealing with millions of damage. And the plus 20% cooldown rate is not even noticeable, so I don't even have to worry about that. It's just a free 25% more increased damage. And I've used it in occasions where I could pull enemies away from the clone in case it gets meleeed, because I've seen the clone get meleeed once and die, and that's very frustrating. And let's just do a real quick recap of the skill trees. We go all the way down on red, no points in the green, down to tier 4 on domino effect on purple, and then capstone on blue. These are my guardian ranks. These are my Mayhem modes. And if you're looking for other level 72 builds, we have plenty of other on the channel, like my Fadeaway plus King's Call / Queen Call build. That build is a Flak build that's able to deal millions upon millions of damage. With Fadeaway, the King Call procs its projectiles and just shoots all the projectiles into the air when on hit, and they split up into the air and home back on down to the enemy. You're able to kill lots of bosses really, really quickly with that. It's a lot of fun in case you want to try a fun Flak build. If you want a Moze build that's all about using Iron Cub to deal the most amount of damage, we have an Iron Cub plus Recurring Hex. The Recurring Hex allows us to keep Iron Cub out there as long as possible and to proc all the stats, effects, dots with the skill tree very, very easily and very, very free. You basically have infinite uptime with Iron Cub if you use that build, so click up there in case you want that. If you want a Flak build that's all about Peregrine and dealing a billion damage per rack attack, this build uses the Fish Slap plus Unleash the Dragon to deal a billion damage with the Fish Slap, and since it does a billion damage, that billion damage does put a dot with Unleash the Dragon that allows it to deal 200 million damage per second with the dot, which is absolutely crazy. And if you guys want a Moze build that's all about using Iron Bear's Fist to deal 1 billion damage per punch, you should try my Iron Fist plus Flare build. It's able to kill pretty much any enemy very, very easily, and it's a ton of fun. Be able to melee with Iron Bear and actually be effective. And then finally, if you want a Flak build that's all about shooting the OPQ system, but not for its bullets, but for its drones, to spawn an infinite amount of drone army behind you to basically just eliminate any enemy you look at, try my OPQ system plus Infernal Wish. The Infernal Wish allows the OPQ system to spawn true drones at once, and you're able to eliminate all the enemies that you point out very, very easily. Alrighty buddies, if you want to try this build out, there's going to be a save file in the description and the comments, so don't forget to check that out. And don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and I hope y'all have a great day. Bye-bye.
And the last shall be first to immerse in a pass out heat, facing him up with a moxie melt till he woke up drowning in tchotchke hell. War in a cave with a torch on a wall, then a window arrangement of porcelain dolls.